Thank you. This is a power breakfast topic I have avoided for the past few years. There's been a lot of hot air generated about what we should do about economic development, and I didn't want to be responsible for polluting our community with any more emissions. But I think three things have happened to make this a timely discussion. First, our economy is recovering. Instead of being concerned about what other bad things may happen, our region now has the opportunity to be proactive in deciding what we want to focus on. Second, New Hanover County is currently considering changes to its special use permit, which could go a long way toward determining what companies will consider moving here. And third, New Hanover County recently hired Gartner Economics to assess the region's plan to attract businesses and jobs. A draft of this group's report recently came out, and the final report will be delivered soon to the county. I have three main topics I want to cover today on how we can boost business in the region. First, what industries we can focus on. Second, leadership in the community to how we can get things done. And third, for how we market the region. We've got 5 people representing 5 different groups with us today. To my immediate left is Jim Bradshaw, Executive Director of Brunswick County Economic Development Commission. Jim's organization is funded by Brunswick County and private donations to represent the county. Next to him is Scott Satterfield, CEO of Wilmington Business Development. Scott's organization is funded by New Hanover County, Pender County, the City of Wilmington, and private donations to represent those 2 counties and the city. Next is Hal Kitchen, who was the 2013 chairman of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce's Board of Directors and is the current chairman of the Chamber's Cape Fear Future Initiative, which focuses on attracting knowledge workers to our region. And in the interest of full disclosure, I serve on the board of the Chamber and the Cape Fear Future with Hal. Next is Lloyd Smith, who is co-founder and chairman of the Cape Fear Economic Development Council. His group's mission is fulfilling the need for leadership in sustainable economic development and job creation in our region. And on the end is Robin Spinks, who is vice chair of the Coalition for Economic Advancement. Her group is dedicated to responsible economic development and serving as a counterbalance to anti-job groups that obstruct responsible industries that wish to move here. So if we could please welcome our panel. So part of my job today is going to be to cut through any jargon. So I'll start with cutting through the jargon in my own introduction. And Lloyd and Robin can correct me later if I oversimplify this. But when I describe their groups to people in layman's terms, I say Lloyd's group is a pro-business, pro-growth organization that opposes heavy industry like Titan, and Robin's group is a pro-business, pro-growth organization that is in favor of responsible heavy industry like Titan. And by the way, if you're new to our community, Titan is a subsidiary of Trojan Corporation, and they are considering building a condo manufacturing plant nearby. Or maybe it's some other type of plant. Anyway, seriously, I'd like to start us off by reading a few lines from the Gartner report. And to be frank about it, the Gartner report did not give our region particularly good marks. So these are a couple quotes, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel to get the conversation going. First quote, New Hanover County will need to make substantive changes if it hopes to diversify its economy and create more and better job opportunities for its citizens. The county must become proactive in shaping its economic future with a more targeted approach and better defined roles and responsibilities. As a whole, the area's business development activities appear to be reactive. This report was done specifically for New Hanover County, but it makes it clear the county needs to work with other nearby localities and other organizations to take on what it calls transformational initiatives. I'm going to read a few of them. There's 20 different initiatives that the recommends. Some of the ones that are higher priorities include exploring the feasibility of consolidated government, particularly with New Hanover County and the City of Wilmington. The Chamber creating a political institute to recruit and train business leaders to serve in public office. Eliminating the special use permit from the county's permitting process. Developing a real estate portfolio of additional sites for industrial, commercial, and office development. Quote, rebuild Wilmington, which means developing more water and sewer infrastructure as well as bridges, roads, bike trails, green space, and waterways. And then several areas in the marketing area, in terms, particularly establishing target industry working groups for several different areas that they recommend focusing on. So I'd like to start the discussion by getting some reaction to the report, and I'd like to start with Robin, specifically because she's worked on all sides of economic development. She's represented community, she lives here, but she's represented communities outside of here. She's bought industrial properties, and she's worked as a site selection consultant, comparing communities in many different states. So Robin, if you could start us off and maybe give a reaction first to your thoughts on Gartner's recommendations.
Sure. Let me start off by saying that Jay and I are very friendly competitors, and so I'm a tad uncomfortable looking over his shoulder in my hometown. But with that, I think that kind of gives me some perspective, because I have both the outside perspective of a consultant and also because I live here. I think there's a couple of things that are critical to remember as you listen to the things that Rob has just said about the recommendations, and I hope that you will read it. The information is about 150 pages long, and I will tell you I've not read every word, but I've certainly looked at every page and looked at all of the information. It's very important to remember that the perspective that he brings to this study is not about what do we need to make it a better place to live. It is about what do we need to make jobs happen here and make high-wage jobs happen here. So it's from the perspective of a business looking at the community to determine whether or not they want to bring their business here versus a person. And so a lot of the recommendations for those of us who came here to live rather than came here to work seem sort of counterintuitive, and I want to make sure everybody really understands that perspective of the report first. The second thing is that it was only for New Hanover County, and he was paid to look at the data for New Hanover County. Typically, we are paid by one entity when we do projects like that, but we need to have a little broader perspective. And so he does indeed have some comments about the region, and I'm going to talk a second about that. Number two is, I think that the data is amazing. He has 100 pages, more than 100 pages of just raw data about who we are and the kinds of data that businesses look at. Some key issues there that I think it's interesting for y'all to know about the data is that, one, we are both a young and an old community. The age cohorts in the 20-year-olds and in the plus 50-year-olds are larger than most communities, which is great. We know we're a retiree community. We have retirees and young retirees moving here all the time, but we also have that 20-year-old age cohort that every other city in this United States of America is trying to recruit. We already have them. We just need to figure out how to keep them here. The other thing about the data that's really important to note is that the wage sectors, the average manufacturing wage in this county is over $95,000 a year. That is 50% higher than the next highest, which is the professional technical area, which was about $60,000 a year. And then we go down into the tourism sectors, which are food and accommodation, typically about $17,000 a year, and our very favorite and wonderful arts sector, which is only about $18,000 a year. So in his perspective, in recommending targets, he's trying to look at things that are high-value wages. The other thing that's interesting about the data is that we are a highly educated community. Our average wage, weekly wage, really reflects the fact that we have so many people that are employed in the lower wage sectors. And so compared to the communities that he compared us to in those United States, the state, Mobile, Alabama, and Greenville, South Carolina, our average wages are lower. That reflects the fact that we just have a lot of people employed in low wage sectors. So I think it's important to note that what he's trying to accomplish with his recommendations is to take advantage of our highly educated population and put them in higher wage jobs that they deserve. We are substantially underemployed in this community. And so I think that's really a lot to do with the purpose. I really liked his recommendations on the target sectors. I think certainly the biotech sector is one that not only New Hanover County, but the region and the state are all trying to recruit. It certainly is a great fit here. I liked the fact that he was looking at aerospace because the civil aviation sector is one of the few that's just booming all over the world, and the United States certainly has a stronghold, and we have a lot of resources nearby for that. I certainly think that the office sector, because we have a very white-collar type of a workforce, is an appropriate sector. And I think that precision manufacturing, the ones that he described, are very appropriate. The one that he left out, obviously, was the film industry, which we all know is huge here. And in my conversation with Jay, because I did call him and ask him some questions about the things that I was reading, he assured me that in the final report, that certainly was going to be mentioned a lot higher. And he said to me, he said, I wasn't trying, he said, I'm looking at an economic development and a high wage sector focus as opposed to the lower industry sectors and things like the arts. The other thing about the data that's real important to remember is that as much as we love to live here, quality of life, from a site selection perspective, quality of life factors are at the very bottom of an industry's list of things that they're looking for. The things that they're looking for are sites and workforce and infrastructure. And we have a list of sites. We certainly have a portfolio of sites and buildings in all of our counties, but what we don't have is our sites, because I looked at the list just this week. Our sites don't have water and sewer to them. So our precious zoned industrial property doesn't have infrastructure, and in my world, when I'm in the site selection world, that's not a site, that's a piece of property. It's like going into a dress shop and needing a dress for the party that night and them saying, well, gosh, I can design one for you. Well, I got to go to the party that night, and that just doesn't work. So a site is not a site until it has water and sewer right there. We don't have a lot of buildings, and what few we have for sale are way overpriced. So finally, to the recommendations, and then I'll be quiet, is that I don't think Jay would have done his job had he not made some recommendations that make us very uncomfortable. We wouldn't have hired him if we didn't need the help. And so, although we don't like to hear things like consolidate city-county government, we don't like to hear things about who we are that we are not real fond of, that we have low-wage sectors that are primarily where we work. It's just really important that we understand. We know we have a leadership vacuum. It's the white elephant in the room a good number of times, and so unless we're uncomfortable and willing to do something about it, we're going to be stuck where we are. So I would like to say that I felt like his recommendations were pretty much right on. I thought the pharmacy school was particularly interesting, but overall I think he did a really good job, and I hope you will be willing to read the full report and understand the perspective most of all.
And by the way, if people haven't seen it, we posted a draft copy of the report on a column I did before, and we'll probably, on the story we do from this event, we'll probably post it there again if you want to be able to see the...
And please go to the April the 2nd presentation to the County Commissioners meeting and hear it straight from Jay's mouth, exactly what he means by the things that he's recommended. I really would strongly suggest that you do that if at all possible.
Lloyd, you want to give us your thoughts?
Sure. So you've heard the intensive industry sort of perspective. I'm coming from a more innovation-focused perspective on economic development. And I would emphasize that this report is a draft, so it does give Jay an opportunity to still correct some of the errors and inconsistencies in it. In particular, one of the things that Rob mentioned was that there's a recommendation to eliminate the special use permit, which is immediately parallel to a recommendation to refine the special use permit, which I agree with. It does need some clarification, and I think those clarifications are in the works, and that's all very positive change, in particular because the industries that the Gardner report recommends that we target, biotech, pharma, medical devices, which is my business, could potentially be impacted by some of the vague language in the existing special use permit. So improve it, but it's inconsistent to say at the same time improve the special use permit and eliminate it. So I think that's something that's important. We need a process to weed out the industries that are inconsistent with the quality of the place that we live in, but also what we aspire to be. I just have a short summary of my whole 4-page presentation, and that is that we should be pivoting away from paying polluters, cultivating cultural, natural, historical resources, and incentivizing innovative industries. So if you can remember anything from this discussion about what I'm advocating for, or what my group is advocating for, it's pivoting, cultivating, and incentivizing innovative industries. Those are the things that I think will get us the 5 times multiplier effect that we desire. That's 5 times non-innovation sector jobs for every 1 innovation sector job that we attract.
Al, you want?
So I remember, it was about this time last year when the Chamber had its annual meeting here in this room, and we brought Jay in to be our keynote speaker. And a lot of you were at that meeting, and I think you will recall with me that a lot of what he said, based on his sort of preliminary look at our local economy, was not positive. You know, that's not, delivering non-positive messages is not typically what a Chamber of Commerce does, so I think it was a bit jarring to some people to hear some of that reality in such stark terms. But I've got to give us as a community and the county in particular a little bit of credit here, because after hearing what was not a sort of glowing review of the situation we've got here, the fact of the matter is the county took up the mantle and said, you know what, not only are we not going to ignore what he had to say, we're actually going to pay him to say more of it. We want to hear more about that. We want more data. We want more recommendations. And so the first thing I would say about the process that we've gone through with Jay's report is we in this room should appreciate the fact that it was done. And I think that shows that there is an inclination now among our community and in this respect among our political leadership to show the kind of leadership we need to start having this conversation so the things that are broken can get fixed, right? So I think we all owe appreciation to the county, in particular Woody, who I know was very adamant that this is something that we should take a look at. So my first reaction is I appreciate the fact that we've done this work and gone through this process. Second, I would say I hope that everyone in this room, or most of the people in this room, will be involved in reading it and engaging with it. Because, look, I don't think anybody expects that an outsider is going to give us a report and we're going to put it in front of the county or the city or whoever needs to look at it, and they're just going to say, okay, approved, let's go do all that stuff, right? So what it is it is a conversation starter, and we are the ones who have to have the conversation. So I would ask everybody to take a look at it, read it, try to understand where this independent third party is coming from when he gives us what I think is a pretty honest evaluation of our situation as he sees it from a distance, and think about how you can be involved to implement the things you think would be good for our community. The third thing I would urge folks is do not expect to agree with all the recommendations that Jay makes. It would be pretty shocking if we were all able to get on the same page and we said, look, everything this guy thinks we ought to do, we ought to do. That's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. So as you read through this and as the community discussion starts, because that's really where we are, this is the start. This is not the end, okay? So as the community discussion starts, keep an open mind and don't get sidetracked if you see things in there that you don't like. If you don't like them, say it. Let's have a conversation about all the things, whether you think they're good or they're bad.
Scott?
Well, first of all, looking at Jay's report, there's some affirmation in there that some of the sectors that he talks about very eloquently are sectors that we're already very involved in. Aerospace, he's extremely excited about that for this area. We began working with ILM Business Park several years ago to certify that park so we would be ready when the right opportunity presents itself, or we find the right opportunity to locate there. On the tails of that was a major aviation expansion at GE that was highly competitive, not only here, but in the state of North Carolina. And thanks to the leadership of Woody White and the county commissioners, they helped incent a major agreement to get GE to expand their aviation facility here that will last for many years. Secondly, another affirmation, look at a company like Guilford's corporate headquarters, or Brett Martin and Castle Branch's corporate headquarters. He believes that we should try to find those niche corporate headquarters that we can bring here, and where lifestyle may matter some in recruiting employees and the retention of employees. So check, once again, the City of Wilmington, Mayor Sifo and the county commissioners help us put together a compelling package to keep Brett Martin and Castle Branch growing here, a company that one of my former employees, Mr. Jeremy Phillips here, wore out a pair of shoes helping put Castle Branch in downtown Wilmington back in 2003 and 4. Now they're adding 420 more employees, a world-class corporate office next to their current corporate office, and the rest can be said about that. Verizon's adding 160 jobs while we speak. Jay speaks to these high-value companies that you need to bring to the area. Verizon speaks to that immensely. They spin off nearly $500 million a year, $500 million in this local economy. So, and we work closely with Randall Johnson's out here somewhere with the Biotech Center. Without any question, the pharmaceutical biotech industry is one that we're deeply involved in, and we have on our board of directors Mr. Mike Wilkinson from PPD, the Chief Information Officer. That's an important sector to us. Fred Eshelman's a friend of our organization. We continue to work those sectors as well. So when you look at all that, I look at some affirmation for some of the sectors that we're already deeply involved in and have been. So we're really, I believe that those were, that part of the report, Rob, was compelling to me.
Jim?
First of all, I want to extend welcome from Myrtle Beach, MSA. Still don't understand that.
Having fun now.
We're a little bit different from New Hanover County. Scott and I work together. We attend trade shows together, and we do conferences together, but it's with those type of target industries that we both have in common. Brunswick County, by the way, does have 2 certified industrial parks, 1,100 acres each, that does have sewer, water, natural gas, rail. So we are actively marketing that. We're not marketing it per se for Brunswick County. When we go across the United States, we're marketing it as part of the Wilmington region. People don't know Brunswick County from Currituck County when you go to Atlanta, Denver, wherever, where we've been recently, meet with site consultants. They know Wilmington. So when we're marketing our sites, we are marketing with Wilmington. We have a team, Scott brought up Randall, and by the way, Randall promised Scott and I drinks if we mentioned his name, so Randall Johnson, thanks for that. But John Nelms from Power, we got the Duke Power, we've got the Port Authority folks. Both Scott and I cannot do it on our own. It's a team effort. So it's important to have that team together. So we make it a point, Kelly Stewart and I travel throughout the country, meet face-to-face with site consultants, with industries that we're targeting, attending trade shows. That's important for us to get out around the country and to promote the Wilmington region. And Scott and Billy do that. It's just that we have different industries that we're trying to promote for our communities. So again, a team effort working together to promote Wilmington is important.
So the next topic I'd like to talk about is what focus we have. So you heard there were several recommendations in the Garner report as to what we should focus on. I think there's general confusion in the community as to, do we have focus? And the Garner report says at one point, Wilmington Business Development has not proactively pursued targeted industries, nor has it institutionalized a lead generation program. So I think when I talk to different groups, I get different answers about what are we targeting groups? So I guess my first question here to Scott and Jim is, are we targeting groups, and if so, industries, and if so, what specific marketing or incentive initiatives do we have to target? You want to start, Scott?
Sure, be glad to. I guess kind of going back to what I said previously. I like Jay a lot. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. We have a very proactive marketing approach. Again, those sectors that we talked about, they don't just happen, whether it's working with Chip Mahan and his team with Encino and Live Oak, or whether it's working with the pharmaceutical sector, the aerospace sector. Clearly, a great success story. In fact, one of the principals in this operation is in the room here is food processing is a sector that we've been excited about. We encouraged Pender County to purchase a large tract of land several years ago when BASF downsized and moved off of their property there. Pender County had the foresight to buy that property, and we knew that we had a great opportunity with a high-class water system and a very up-to-grade wastewater treatment opportunity that we could lure a major food processing manufacturer to this area. And we did that with the help of Duke Energy and its food processing initiative. Again, Jim mentions that's one of our partners. We make the awareness to them of what our capabilities are to support that type of operation. And with that, in the last few months, if you drive up Highway 421 right now in Pender County, you'll see a pad for 100,000 square foot state-of-the-art processing center, and with another 100,000 foot pad being cleared as well, we hope for sometime down the road. A food processor, a leader in its class, Acme Smoked Fish Corporation is a 100-year-old company out of Brooklyn, New York. They're a leader in their industry, and we're really excited about what that sector, which we clearly didn't just start proactively going after 2 or 3 weeks ago. That was something that's been in the make for several years. And speaking again to the aviation, to the corporate headquarters, to the other things we do. But let me also say this: like any good business, yeah, you need to be proactive. But how do you react? That is always critical. Any great fighter knows that they can come out there with their strategy, how they're going to take their opponent down, but if they don't know how to react when they're hit somewhere where they weren't planning on being hit, then they're not going to win the fight. And that's exactly what we do. And I can assure you that our ally team and our regional allies are at the top of their game all the time, and we prepare for that reaction. So I think that speaking for our organization, I'm extremely pleased with the target markets that we're after. We certainly are always trying to unveil new markets. We are in a very, thank goodness, we're in a diverse region. I tell people all the time that what's important on Military Cutoff or Market Street it's just as important to me what's important on Fremont Street in Burgaw. And there's a very a broad economy and a diverse economy, and Brunswick County is certainly in that mix with us. So we have to embrace a myriad of opportunities, and what may be right for one particular community may not be exactly what another wants, but the rising tide will certainly help everybody's boat float. And I'm really pleased again, Rob, that the affirmation from if Mr. Garner's report is our measuring device right now, that he clearly hit on several points that we're very actively engaged in.
Jim, can you talk about Brunswick County?
Yes, we targeted several categories. Aeronautical, that's where Scott and I are familiar with. We have plastics, boat building operations. Metal fabrication has been our most success over the past few years. Logistics. When we select these targeted industries, the main point is you don't sit in your office and twiddle your thumbs. I know Billy and Scott are out. We're out constantly. Kelly Stewart just got back from California, meeting at a conference there for airplane part manufacturers. At the same time, I was in Denver at a site consultant guild. Next week, I'm going to Dallas to talk about, work with some consultants in energy. We are constantly on the go because you've got to get the word out. But you can't just depend on me and Scott. I mean, this is a team effort. Remember, we talked about teams. I've got members of the teams out in the audience. When they go to their conferences, when they go to their trade shows, they're speaking up Brunswick County and the Wilmington region. So we got to rely on you guys too, not just us, to bring in new industry, to get the word out. What does the Wilmington area have to offer? So we have a number of trade shows. We're meeting with site consultants in Atlanta, Dallas, New York, Chicago. We're going out and meeting with these folks face to face, just as you are when you take folks out to lunch. It's important to keep in contact with people. You just can't sit in your office and expect things to come to you. And that's why Scott and Billy and Kelly and myself were out all over the country meeting with these folks. You don't hear about it, but we're out there. We're promoting the Wilmington region, and we're promoting Brunswick County in my case. So that's important to have the communications and the face-to-face meetings to promote the Wilmington region.
Rob, I'd like to make a comment about that if I could. The way things are structured in the economic development world, the way, as a site consultant, the way I look at where I start, I sort of look at the state and the regional organizations as the marketing organizations. They're the lead generators, what we would call the shooters. And the local people in the local geographies are the skinners. And they're the ones that are supposed to close. And so the state of North Carolina spends not nearly enough money, but some money, and they're hoping to spend more. That's why they're trying to reorganize. And so as a site consultant, if North Carolina or even a part of North Carolina is in my geography for where that project is going to go, I don't generally call a Jim or a Scott. I generally will call the State Department of Commerce and get assigned to a person. Or if I know that I want to be generally in the Wilmington region, then I'm more likely to call Steve Yost and the partnership, because I know that the resources are in the region. And that's the one thing I slightly disagreed with Jay's report about, is that I think the region is much larger than these 3 counties that we're discussing. The region, the resources for this region, the raw material resources that are some of the things that would bring me as a manufacturer or my project here are out. I think that Duplin County and Columbus County and even Onslow County for that matter are certainly significant parts of our region. I think if you looked at the traffic on Saturday, it's just as bad as it is on Wednesday, because all those people are coming to Wilmington for their services. And so we're very dependent on a much larger region. But in terms of focus, and so I think it's really important that all of these entities have their marketing key messages aligned. And I think that's one of the things that Jay's report does, and these guys have both talked about it. We're aligned at all the levels with aviation. The Southeast Regional Partnership spends 90% of their time and money on marketing, and SINS leads this direction. So all the levels are responsible. But it's impossible to brand an area as small as New Hanover County, and that's one of the things about the report, this perspective you have to remember. So it's very important to work regionally and to have your targets all aligned all the way up and down from the state through the region and through the local entity. And know that the closing, the actual closing of the deal is where it happens in Scott and Jim's office.
And Robert's a good point, because last year we had 35 projects, 14 visits from the State Department of Commerce. And the Department of Commerce is now, we don't know what's going to happen with them. They just brought us a project this past Monday. And this coming Monday, I'll be in Raleigh meeting with them for lunch. I go up there quarterly to treat each of the marketing reps to lunch, just to remind them on Brunswick County. Well, there's only 5 left. The others are leaving because they don't know what's going to happen with their jobs at the Department of Commerce. So that's a major concern that Scott and I have, and others, economic development directors all over the state. What's going to happen with the Department of Commerce? And that's going to be a critical element this coming year on marketing our area.
Rob, let me try to add maybe just a little different gradation to the conversation here about the marketing piece. And I'll actually attribute this to you, Rob. You described this years ago to me as the difference between marketing and sales. You know, the marketing is getting the word out there, and then the sales is closing the deal. And we got closers here. There's no doubt about that. I want to follow up on what Robin said about the role of North Carolina Southeast and the Southeast Regional Partnership. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity to our region right now. And what I mean by that is, as Jim has just described, the state is sort of backing off, and we have this process by which this public-private partnership is going to be created. What it's going to look like, we're not really sure of at this point. Meanwhile, for the most part, my understanding is the regional partnerships they're going to lose their appropriation from the state, okay? So the group that has primarily been responsible for marketing the larger region, the southeast region, and by all accounts has done a great job at it, is going to be losing its state appropriation. Meanwhile, I think that area has actually gotten larger. So we are now in a marketing partnership region with not only New Hanover and Pender and Brunswick, but I think it goes all the way to Anson County and Montgomery County. Folks, that is a big, big region, and there are a lot of different geographies there. I grew up in Richmond County, which is on the western side of this area, and I can tell you that the needs there are not the same as the needs that we have here. So this is not by way of suggesting that we need to leave North Carolina Southeast behind and we can't use their good services anymore. And I understand Robin's point about, at least for the manufacturing sector, to some extent, the raw materials are there in some of these other counties. But at the Chamber, we are focused not only on sort of for lack of a better term, what we would call the manufacturing sector, but we are also concerned about innovation workers. And when you start talking about the things that matter to innovation workers, these are quality of place assets, and this is something I know Lloyd is very concerned about. That is something where our message is not going to be the same as the message from Richmond County or Scotland County. It's just not. So one of the things Jay suggests in his report is that we take a look at a micro-marketing alliance with Pender and Brunswick County. And that is something I hope everybody will give consideration to, because there is a local message that we need to send, and it might not be quite as important with manufacturers, but when you're trying to induce sort of knowledge sector workers, innovation workers to come here, build their businesses here, that's a story that I think we can tell better ourselves.
Just a couple of comments on that. I would say I agree with a lot of your points about the difference of our region with respect to the larger region that we've been kind of lumped into. I think it's particularly important to think, if we're thinking in terms of this marketing and sales and business metaphor, that we should think about the sort of front end of that process. Because I've been in this medical device business for a long time. You know you're in trouble when marketing is in charge of developing your product. It's a disaster. You need to be in front of customers and understanding what they want. That needs to feed back through product development. It's a cycle. It all has to work together. So we need to understand what our product is. We need to decide what we're marketing, and then we should be saying what we should be targeting. So it's an intentional process. It has to be thoughtful. We need to consider what we want and pursue that. Not just sit back and wait for bluebirds in a sales analogy to land in our lap. We should be pursuing what we want.
So, Robin, from the perspective of a site consultant or a company, is it not important that there is one website for the region that defines this is who we are, this is the type of industries we are targeting, and all that data? I would think just number one, on the face of it, no offense, but the fact that we have to have two people up here to just define our three-county region, and as you said, the region's probably even really larger than that. But I'm just thinking from the outside looking in, there's a lot of websites out there. I feel like for our community versus when you look at some other communities, it seems like there's one main economic development site that tells the story, shows the available sites.
I'm going to slightly disagree, but I need to explain why. Because my job as a site consultant is a translator. And we translate data because the areas, and I'm going to use that word very loosely, the political areas, the marketing areas, all the areas have key messages that they're trying to send to us as site consultants about who they are and who they want you to see. It's my job to sift through the marketing information and to put the data together that is important to my specific project that I'm working on. And so I know that I know the structure of how economic development organizations are all over the country, and they're all different everywhere. And so I know I have to look and sift through the sales presentation to the information that I want, and I know where to go get it and how to go get it. So yes, and the other thing is that I think it's very important to know that there is no one, there's never going to be one economic development organization in a community. There's too many different kinds of economic development, as Lloyd and I have talked about. I mean, the coalition is about a diverse economy. And so the things that sell to the creative economy and the things that sell to manufacturers and the things that sell to retail and the things that sell to the film community are very different. So there's no way you're going to be able to have one place where all of that resides, I don't think. If you do, you look like you're confused. So I don't know. I don't know if I quite answered your question, but I can tell you that we don't expect to find the information in one place.
And any other thoughts on how we, in terms of how we present ourselves? I mean, I think, Lloyd, you know, what you said, obviously we have to know what we're selling before we go out there and do it. But I think, you know, I think there's a good amount of confusion about all the different groups and what they do. And I don't think that's particularly different from any other community. Like every other community has a lot of different groups, a lot of different interests, you know, which is generally a good thing that we have that. But, you know, I often say to people, well, Wilmington's we're trying to figure out what we want to be when we grow up.
Well, on that point, I think just the fact that you have so many of us up here talking about this just illustrates the fact that there should be an expectation that we'll all find some common interests and that we'll all work together on those. So continuing to pull in different directions is not doing us any good. And I think that from the outside is something that really is apparent to people. So finding commonality among our interests and focusing on those things together, I think, is a good strategy.
Absolutely.
And we can do that and move forward on those things where we do have common interest without getting hung up on the fact that we don't agree on 100% of the things.
Sure.
Right? We can do that. I'm not sure we've done a great job of that in our community historically, but I think if we focus on the things that we can agree on, let's move forward on those things and just keep debating the things that we don't agree on.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think as Robin mentioned and others, a lot of this comes down to leadership. I would say the folks on this stage, probably most of the people out here, probably agree on 90 to 95% of the things. I mean, I had discussions with each of you before this, and there are a few points I know there's some disagreement on, and, you know, same thing in the community. But to me, and we've had this discussion, which is why I've been hesitant to have this discussion again, because we've had the same discussion in 2009 with folks who work in economic development and community leaders and things like that. In the end, I think there actually is broad agreement on where we want to go. Occasionally we may disagree on a baseball stadium or something like that. But to me, it comes down to leadership. And that to me is the biggest issue. It was identified, I think, in the Gartner report as the biggest issue. So where does this leadership come from? And I'm probably going to turn to Robin again to start us, because, you know, you work with a lot of different communities, and I know you'll assess this in different communities. So how does this work? If we're going to look at case studies of other communities that have had the leadership and really move forward with very specific programs.
Well, I think, let me start with the problem and why we have these kind of problems, is that, I said earlier, we're a community where we're having growing pains. We're going from being what we used to be, which was an isolated community that was, you know, river and beach and locally focused. And as soon as I-40 was finished, we turned into a whole different place. And we haven't quite internalized all those changes. We have a lot of people who have moved into this community from somewhere else, and they don't know the dynamics, they don't know the people, and so instead of researching it, they pull a lever. And so they don't, and that lever is based on whatever their idea of party was from wherever they came. It's not about who we are here, it's about their perspective from where they came. And so I think that we need to do a much better job of bringing newcomers into the knowledge base and if we had a common vision and if we were more positive with our outlook about what we wanted and had our discussions about what we don't want a little more silently, then it would be easier for those people who are coming in to assimilate and to jump on board and be excited with us. So I think that has something to do with it. We've also had a great deal of turnover. I mean, we've had a good deal of turnover in our elected officials over the last few years, and certainly that continuity or lack of continuity to some degree makes a difference. Those are just a few things that I would say, but I do think that it's important. Jay's idea about the Leadership Institute inside the chamber, that's something that's typically done in a lot of chambers. Typically, when we go into a community to look at leadership, what we try to do is to find out where the money is. That's usually where the leaders are. And a lot of times the money likes to be silent and likes to put people out in front. And so I think that it's real important that we look to see where, and when I say where the money is, I don't mean individuals so much as I do as the sectors of our economy that are where our wealth comes from. And so I think it's just really important that we try to encourage people to get involved, for starters, and to become knowledgeable about who they're voting for. I think that's extremely important.
Anyone else want to tackle the leadership issue?
Well, I'll say I think that if we're going to move the community forward on economic development, the leadership is, you're pretty much looking at it today. The people in this room, for the most part, are going to be the people who either make it happen or, just acquiesce in the status quo. We've got good political leaders. We've got some people who are involved in, not in a political way, but in sort of the private sector trying to move us forward. But we need the support. We need a broader base of support. I have this conversation with Woody all the time. He wants to know what the business community thinks we need to do to move the community forward. I think that to the extent we can go ahead and have the conversation, try to figure out the areas in which we agree, communicate to that message to the people who are in a position to make things happen. I think that would be leadership. And I think we need to do a little bit more of it in this community.
I think there's a lot of disconnect between the business community and the rest of the community. I think the number, especially when you add in places like Pender and Brunswick, where there's a substantial retiree community of people who are no longer working and who have fixed incomes, whether they're high or low. You've got a whole different perspective on government and on being progressive than you do if you're still in business and you have an outlook that includes a farther future.
Yeah, I want to compliment New Hanover and Wilmington. When we had a number of projects you all don't know about that came to Brunswick County, but Mayor Sappho was with us in several of those projects. He did a great job promoting the Wilmington region. Scott set me up with the New Hanover school administrator who came in and talked about the schools. Scott set me up with a hospital in Wilmington as well as Brunswick's hospital. They came in. So the leadership in Wilmington has been more than helpful with Brunswick County to try to help us bring industries to the community. So I want to extend my appreciation to Wilmington's leadership and New Hanover's leadership in assisting us with trying to bring industry in the area.
Just getting back to a point that Robin made about site selectors looking where the money is, I think we should be careful that that process doesn't lead to outside interests who don't necessarily have a stake in the community, like all of us do, driving the whole process. If we're thoughtful about what we want up front and we put our resources toward growing those industries and those kinds of initiatives, then we won't be caught in a situation where a site selector finds that there is an opportunity to do something because some outside group is funding an initiative that's not necessarily consistent with the interests of the community.
I think that's rampant in politics, where we've got lots of money coming from the outside,
For sure.
putting advertisements on TV every day, funded by some, PAC I've never heard of outside of the community.
Let's start to take some questions from the audience. First, the question from Commissioner Barfield, table 15.
Good morning, Rob. You've mentioned a lot about the SUP and its effects on our community. I'm the only active commissioner on our board that was there when the SUP was passed. And what I don't hear us talking about is why the SUP came about to begin with. And if you go back to when our county was facing what was called non-attainment with SO2, we were the only county in the whole state of North Carolina to be identified with an SO2 problem, which would have shut down the industry, period, within our community. So me, along with Commissioner Catlin, Sean Ralston, went to D.C., met with the number 2 person from the EPA to talk about how can we mitigate this. We set up 2 additional testing sites in our county to show that we were not facing that anymore. The fact that Progress Energy shut down its coal burning facility and now is going to natural gas helped with that. The fact that southern states had stopped their operations as well helped with that. And looking at where we were going as a community with non-attainment, had that really happened in our community, Jay Garner's report would have been something totally different. And we wouldn't have industry even looking at our community, period, because we wouldn't have the capacity for that because of our air quality. And I think it's something that we need to talk about. When you look at something that's happened, go back to why that thing happened to begin with and make sure that you explain that situation to the entire public, because it's a bigger conversation than just the special use permit. Recognizing that we do want industry to come here. I've been here since I was a year old. My dad served as a county commissioner here for 12 years. This is my home. I want to make sure that my kids are able to grow up here with a nice environment. So again, as we have this conversation, let's look at the whole picture as well. And I love what she said about the fact that when you look at site selections in the Castle Hayne area, if you have no water and sewer, nothing's going to happen anyway. So the conversation needs to happen with the K-FIT Public Utility Authority as well in terms of how do we get water and sewer out to those areas. My church just built a brand new facility a couple of years ago, and in that area it's the least growing part of our county because of the lack of water and sewer infrastructure. So can you have someone address that, sir?
Why don't we start off, just to make sure everybody understands what the special use permit is. Maybe Hal, if one, you could give us a summary. You spent a lot of time on this, on what it is, and then 2, what is the proposal that's going to go before the county commissioners soon?
Sure. So the
In like 90 seconds or less.
yeah, okay. All right.
That's the hard part.
Well, what Jonathan is referring to is a process that was put in place in 2011 that applies to some industry that would build a project in land in the county that's already zoned either I-1 or I-2. So those are the industrial zoning classifications. And if you are subject to the special permit requirement, what that means is you have to apply to the county and you have to get the approval of the planning board and the county commissioners before you can go forward with your project. The proposal that's sort of on the table right now is not a proposal, and this is, I think, the subject of some confusion, is not a proposal to get rid of the special use permit. It is not what Jay Garner will recommend in his report. It is a process where we hope to take some of the uncertainty in the process, that is the actual mechanics of submitting an application and then hearing back from the planning staff and getting in front of the planning board and then getting in front of the commissioners. What we're trying to do is we're trying to put a timeline on that and put some objective sort of measures around what you're going to be required to submit in order to be able to get a decision. It doesn't dictate whether you're going to get a yes or a no on the permit. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the process a little more certain so people who have to apply for this sort of thing will have a better idea of what they're going to go through.
And let me just make sure and make it really clear that what Jay's talking about was the original SUP, not the one that's being discussed at the moment. So his objection was to the original one. And the original one was, from a site selector's perspective, it was very vague. And I think that there are a huge number of clarifications that have been made, and even more importantly, the table of permitted uses, which goes by SIC codes now instead of general or heavy manufacturing, which is very subjective, has been clarified. I think that more than anything has clarified a lot of it.
In particular, the Garner report points out that the way the SUP was written when he read it before his report, it would have impeded medical devices,
Right.
pharma, and biotech. And that's obviously not what we
Right.
intended as a community. We want to attract those industries, so.
It had a lot of unintended consequences.
And let me follow up on Commissioner Barfield's question and comment. I think he's absolutely right that we should not forget the work that was done in 2011 by the then current commissioners, including Commissioner Barfield and Commissioner Catlin, and the planning staff, to try to address what was a very serious problem for our community. If we had been tagged with non-attainment, it would have been devastating to exactly the sort of manufacturing businesses that we now want to promote in the county. So we can't lose sight of that. I will say, on the unintended consequences theme, you know, everything we do, even when we do it in good faith, is going to have some consequences that we can't anticipate in advance, right? So we think that there are unintended consequences with respect to what was done in 2011, in that the requirement was made, not only are there these ambiguities in the process, which we're trying to address here, but, you know, frankly, the requirement was imposed upon a broader group of businesses than some of us think would be absolutely necessary in order to avoid a problem with non-attainment, which, as most of you know, was specifically related to sulfur dioxide emissions. So they're in trying to address a problem that was almost entirely sulfur dioxide related, we impaired a lot of industries that don't emit any kind of sulfur dioxide. So, you know, that's sort of an example of, you know, good people trying to get us out of a serious problem, but maybe what we did was a little bit more than we needed to do, and now we need to take a fresh look at it.
And the list of industries that Jay has in his report that he's targeting, there are only 2 that would even have any kind of air emissions at all. And so, and definitely not sulfur dioxide. So he's recognized the fact of the critical resources that we have, and that our beach and our air and our water are important to us. And so he's, you know, made that comment. Now, and I'm just going to throw this out just for thought purposes. I think that even though he's put these as targets, I still believe that in the long run, there are going to be some other more heavy manufacturing companies that will look in this area. The state of North Carolina has said, we already have a significant plastics industry here, and they want to try to vertically integrate that. And so the chemical industry in general is one that they are targeted, that they are going to target, which hadn't really been a target in the past, and mostly because it hadn't been a growing industry. All of that's been going overseas for the last 20 or 30 years. Well, because of the dynamics of labor going up in China and our cost of energy going down here, those kinds of heavy industry projects, or metals projects, chemical projects, are starting to look back at the United States. And because we do have significant water resources and we are an attainment area, then I think, and especially if offshore drilling becomes a reality anywhere along the East Coast, then we're going to be looked at for that sort of thing. Because the biotechnology sector, the one thing that Jay did say was biological products manufacturing, and certainly we have a huge amount of biomass resource and raw material in the counties, even though we don't have it right here in New Hanover, we have it in the counties surrounding us. And so we could easily be to the energy grass business what Louisiana is to the petrochemical business. And so I think that although Jay did not focus on those heavier industries, there's certainly an opportunity for those to be in the search, for us to be in the search geography for some of that down the road.
In Brunswick County, our 2 sites, 1,100 acres, are 18 miles from the Wilmington area. They're pretty isolated, and that is zoned heavy manufacturing. Now, manufacturing does have emissions, but that's why we have the EPA and DENR in place. And believe me, if you've been through it like I've been through it with the EPA, they are tough cookies. And but we want manufacturing back in the United States. So we're going to have to accept some emissions as long as it meets the qualifications of the EPA and DENR.
Well, I think it's timely that you mentioned DENR, because I think this dialogue about trusting state and federal entities to protect our river, for example, it's important that we look at what's happening and recognize that if you just trust that someone else is going to protect those resources for you, you'll be wishing that you had paid more attention. So, DENR is not necessarily going to be looking out for everything that we care about locally in terms of water quality. Another point about manufacturing moving back from China is that if you pay attention to international news, you'll know that China is at a significant turning point in terms of their ability to accommodate more intensive industry. And guess who has the capacity and the workforce? It's going to come back our direction. We need to be thoughtful about what we allow. It's coming our way because they're at the limit of what they can emit in terms of SO2, NO2, and effluent in their water. So, this is an opportunity for us to be thoughtful about what we bring back in.
I think it's wonderful that in our democratic society, what we have is the ability to have checks and balances. I think it's really important that we have organizations like environmental activists and like the River Keepers who are watching over things that happen, because it's not necessarily DENR's and EPA's responsibility they can't see what everything happens in the river every day so much, but they're the ones that are the implementers of the rules. So you've got the politicians who create the rules, the elected officials who create the rules, then you have the regulators who are supposed to implement those rules with the companies, and then the companies are supposed to do the right thing, and then there are people out there like us that are watching to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And as long as that works properly, then I think we're all in the same boat together.
The question, table 28, Sean Olson.
Yeah, so I'm on my way to Raleigh on Monday, and I see a bumper sticker that says, "Small business built America. Looks like it's time for us to rebuild America." I say that because I know a lot of you guys talked about Castle Branch and Encino, and I didn't really hear a whole lot about the innovation side and what we're doing to work with not only businesses outside of the area, but also the businesses that are here, that are innovative. I'd be curious to see what you guys think on that matter and what your organizations might be doing to meet with those groups.
It was one of my
County,
3
we have a
points to
close working-
incentivize innovation industries, just to point out.
Go ahead.
Wait, say that again.
I was just reminding everyone that was one of my 3 points, incentivize innovation industries. If there should be subsidies or incentives, there's a good place to put it.
Small businesses, I know Scott and I talk about this quite often when we meet, are the critical backbone of any community. The Economic Development Office in Brunswick County has a close working relationship with the community college. We started an entrepreneur small business program, and with that we got $400,000 in grants to create an incubator at the Workforce Training Center at the Brunswick Community College in Leland. But we make it a point, I have one of my staff members, that's her full-time job, is to work with small business and entrepreneurs to go out and meet with folks who want to create their own business in Brunswick County. And as Robin was saying, a good chunk of Brunswick County's new folks moving in are retired, but they still want to keep active and they want to create their own little businesses. So we work with the Brunswick Community College and to encourage them to do that. And we meet with them face-to-face, offer them assistance with their business plans, financial assistance, and even work with Scott's group with his loan program. So that's a very good point. The backbone of the country is small business, and we in Brunswick County make it a point to work closely and encourage that.
Rob, and I'm glad you said that, Jim. And Sean, that's a great question. We've actually done some business with Sean, so we understand the value of small business. Three things that I think are real legacy items to think about with our organization long before I came there. Number one, in 1956, when this organization was formed, it had the idea of being a private, not-for-profit, working closely with city and county government, working closely with the chambers, but being fueled by the private sector, number one. Move forward to today, you'll find that a lot of communities are trying to head in that direction. Our state's trying to head in that direction with its economic development. So public-private partnership was something that the great founding fathers like Dan Cameron were doing 60 years ago here. Number two would be regionalism. You know, that's the buzzword now. Well, 25 years ago, the folks in our organization decided that, there's a great working opportunity with Pender County as well as Brunswick County, but formalized with Pender County, a regional organization, basically. The third thing was entrepreneurism. We began, and Sandy Wood, if he's in this room, many years ago, working the SBA 504 program, which is a fixed asset financing. It's not working capital, it's for actual buildings and equipment and machinery with a useful life of 10 years or more. And those are companies like Global Tested Supply, which I'm sure Rob is familiar with that company, and many small businesses that have started up to the tune of $200 million of initial investment that has been facilitated to small businesses through that program, as well as the creation, and not the spin-off creation, but the actual creation of 6,000 jobs through that program. So we clearly see the value of the small business community and where we can bring resources to the table to help those companies grow, help them create jobs, in turn create tax base. That is a significant portion of what we do. So Sean, I'm glad you brought that out, because a lot of times people think that Jim and I and folks like us just spend all our time working on the great big buffalo hunt, but a tremendous amount of our time is spent. We have, in our large 3.5-person operation, we have one person that spends her whole day working that program. So we're excited about that. So it's a big component.
I would also add that if you look at the details of the 4 sectors that Jay Garner has targeted, a huge number of them are typically small businesses: medical and diagnostic laboratories, environmental consulting services, custom computer programming services, payroll services. I mean, all of those, pension funds, which are oftentimes managed, by individuals. There are tons of those around town already. So, the longer list is in those kinds of businesses under those 4 big categories that would be small and creative economy type businesses.
Well, I think there's a definition that's lost there, because small business is not the engine of jobs. It is new firms, and particularly the largest multiplier in job creation, real jobs, but potentially created outside the sector that you're targeting, is innovation sector, which is made up of IT, life science, clean tech, new materials, robotics, and nanotechnology. So it's a specific list. It's not small businesses. It's innovation sector businesses.
Right. And the ones that he had some of those that we just talked about are exactly in that field, and especially in the bioscience, the biomaterials. I think the Southeast region in particular, and forgive me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but they have a news release that's coming out very soon about an entire effort that they're after, where they've looked at the biomass or hydrocarbon assets in the region and are trying to figure out how, and that is a great fit, if you will, with the marine biology department and all of the marine. Looking at new materials is a huge, huge future in our world, well, for all kinds of uses, whether it's industrial biotech, whether it's medical related, whether it's agriculture related. And I think that sector in particular, which Jay has talked about with some of the innovation pieces of it, or which I think we would definitely agree on, I think has a great future here.
What we want to do is we want to build things or provide services that we can sell to people who are not here, right? It's what, I don't know if Tom Looney's here, but it's what Tom Looney in December explained to be the traded sector, right? We want to do things here that other people want elsewhere, because that's how we bring dollars into our community. That's how we increase overall prosperity. To Sean's question, it takes both the sort of innovation economy sort of growing organically, and it also takes what we've spent a lot of time talking about today, which is how do you get other businesses that are already established to move here. I would be willing to venture a guess that by far the largest, a great majority of all jobs created are created by the former category. Organic growth here that doesn't have anything to do with sort of, targeting policy and that sort of thing. So now that sort of thing is harder for us as a community to directly affect. What we're told is the innovation workers, what they're looking for is they're looking for quality of place, right? So when you hear, the city's has bought some land to build a riverfront park, I know the reaction of some people in this room is, well, how much does that cost? And that's not a bad thing to consider. But another thing you should think about is, okay, when we've developed that, what kind of asset is that going to be to make our community more attractive to the young people who need to come here because they want to come here, but also who will build businesses and employ people throughout the community. I think one thing that I ask myself, and I'd suggest that we all ask ourselves, is do we have the kind of local economy that is going to cause our kids, once they're done with school, to come back to Wilmington? And right now, I'm not sure that the answer is going to be yes in all situations. And we're never going to be Atlanta, we're never going to be Chicago or New York, but we can be a better Wilmington, and we can build a local economy where some of our kids will want to come back here immediately when they get out of school, and those are the most innovative and productive years of their lives.
And sometimes leadership has to do things and spend money on things to put in place those quality of life assets that people will come here to enjoy. And sometimes it's not popular, like you said, Hal. I mean, things like baseball stadiums and convention centers. How long did it take us to get this convention center? 20 years? It should have been here 20 years ago. It's a fabulous, wonderful place. And as soon as we get the hotel thing straight, then it will be quite active. So sometimes they have to do things that might on the surface appear to be unpopular, but when looked at in retrospect, they're what we knew we should have done. We just hated to open our pocketbook and do it.
Rob, let me touch on something real quick. And this isn't uncommon. I give talks all over the place and amongst great audiences like this. And the one thing you're hardly ever asked is, well, what are you guys doing to help keep companies here that are already here? And I'm telling everybody in this room, never take for granted that some of the great employers, the employers that have been here for many years, the employers that pay the significant amount of tax base in this community, don't think they can't do this somewhere else. Don't think that they're not being told all the time, every March and every June and every September and December when quarterly earnings come out of where they can do it better. And if we think for 1 minute, while we're just paying attention to, aggressive, proactive, and reactive, which is clearly important, but as an example, what Chairman White and the commissioners did here recently on a project that we've actually been working on for 3.5 years with Fortron Industries to help keep them competitive. This is one of the top 5 taxpayers in New Hanover County. To help keep them competitive and encourage them to upgrade their facility, actually upgrading their wastewater treatment plant, spending $10 million to have a much better discharge into the Cape Fear River. But to keep meaningful employment, $7.5–8 million payroll there, we've got to understand as a community that if you turn your back and all you do is worry about the next one, you better worry about the one you have. And that's why local regulation, local political leadership, and local understanding of the value of this community. A great portion of the people in this room, I bet, came here in the last 10 or 12 years. And I can tell you, those folks were here, and they were grinding it out, and they were doing it, and it helped make this community attractive to get you here. Don't forget that. It's rarely ever talked about, but the job that this man and I have to do, and our teams every day with our allies to make sure that we're doing what we can do to keep these folks here. Let me tell you, if one of the major corporations, and I don't even want to say the name to put some bad karma on it, but if they walk out of here today, we are looking at a terrific problem from a philanthropic standpoint, from an employee standpoint, from a tax-based standpoint. And we all need to be, I mean, Jim and I have seen some major companies that have had to move out of here, thousands of jobs. So it's all over the place. You've got to keep the ones you have here. So it's never a topic of conversation, but it needs to be on the front of everybody's list.
Well, Scott's
Let's-
changed the
let-
topic. Can I just finish that topic?
Actually, I got to interrupt 1 minute because we got to wrap up, and I got one more thing I want us to do. I said at the beginning, I did not want this to be just a conversation, especially with the group we have assembled here, and then nothing gets accomplished. So I asked Jack Bardo, who's the CEO of New Hanover Regional Medical Center, to wrap up for us. I know Jack has been in a lot of these discussions over the years, and has heard a lot of these things and others, but I also know Jack's a man of action and the largest employer in town, so I want him to wrap us up and basically give us our action items going forward.
Well, again, congratulations to the commissioners for bringing the Garner report in. I think we've been talking a lot about manufacturing today, and I think in the Garner report, you go back, a lot of it was about job creation, job growth, job sustainment. Scott just alluded to out of that process. We are regional. Jim, I probably have 1,000 people out of my 6,000 employees who live in Brunswick County who make the trek every day, who pay taxes and support your organization every day. We've grown jobs in the 10 years from 4,000 employees to over 6,000 employees. That's been done through a 7-county region when we want to talk regionalization. That's been done Duplin, Brunswick, Onslow, all the way to Bladen, Columbus. And I've been involved with Scott's board. Hal and I spent a lot of time on Cape Fear Future together. I've got you two at the end. Interestingly enough, great groups out there doing work. When we look at current state, okay, as I look at current state, I think if we had a direction as to where economic development needs to go, I'm not sure you two need to be in business. If we clearly defined what's out there for manufacturing and what we wanted to bring to town, we decided what types of job we wanted to bring in, what industries we were going to support, we wouldn't spend our time on the 5% of the industries that aren't right for it. We would all be on getting jobs, bringing people in the community. We've seen our current state today. It's not functional. I know how hard it is for you two to bring in a business. It's hitting a grand slam or a home run to relocate a business, and you don't have that many of those, as you know, in your life. Job creation's about singles with a few home runs and a few grand slams, and you guys do as good a job as anybody in the country at doing that. I know that. But I think it's time we get together and define what job growth, economic development, what it looks like in our region, so that we're all on the same page. I write checks to a lot of these organizations for the organization. I authorize them, and I do it now more out of obligation than excitement. I want to start writing those checks out of excitement. And I really want us to define what our future state needs to look like. And that's going to take people getting in a room, being honest, being frank, putting some of the barriers that are up. Because, I mean, Lloyd and Robin, when you two talk, I mean, I'd love to just listen to you two debate for 2 hours. It's an amazing conversation. But what it is a lot of barriers. Why we can't do one thing or why we have to look at the other. That's not productive in coming up with solutions in the long term. We need to define what we need to be as a community, what type of growth and development we want, and then we need to go after that. And then if there's a minority opinion over here for something we're doing that's within the grid that's been agreed on, that needs to be minimalized. Because that should not be taking 95% of the conversation and dialogue. And we need a balanced economy. We need manufacturing jobs. And yes, some of that, unfortunately, Lloyd, might throw some emissions in the air. But then again, in New Hanover County, we don't have the land mass to do a ton of that. Brunswick, Pender, they do. We also need jobs that are innovative. We need jobs for people that are, the white-collar jobs. But I can tell you, with 6,000 employees, I've got a lot of spouses whose spouses need manufacturing and blue-collar jobs. And I lose them sometimes that they've moved here from up north because they can't find work. We've got to balance our economy, but we've got to sit down and determine what we want to be. I'll make an offer if groups want to get together. Clearly, that's Woody and Bill's drive to a great degree, think they have to be involved. We've got a lot of manufacturing. They've been using lean theories for many, many years. We're looking at our current state. I'd be happy to get my group together with a group of economic people, sit down using lean theories, take a week, and try to come out and figure out what we should be from a job growth perspective and look at every aspect of it and what we should bring in the community. And I think it needs to cut down some of the noise. That's an offer, doesn't have to be done, but I think it's time, listening to what we're listening to today, I don't think we can continue as we're continuing any longer and continue to grow. We've got too good a resource here. It's too good a place to not have direction. And again, kudos to the county commissioners for bringing this and starting this dialogue. So I think that's the offer. You guys decide where you want to go, okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack, and if we could please have a round of applause for our panel. We always like to get our panel some relevant reading material, so this time we got them the book Team of Rivals, which I read one description online that I thought was fitting for this occasion. If Abe Lincoln can unite his cabinet and the country around abolishing slavery amidst war, you can probably reconcile conflicting personalities in your community. So, thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Rob.
I know what happened to Abe Lincoln at the end of that. I don't think I was